Good morning, everyone. Hope this is presenting well. It looks a bit laggy on my computer. Let me just shut down a couple of things. Make sure this is going to work correctly. How is everyone this morning? I hope everyone's well. Things are going good here. So, if you've got any questions this morning, you'd like to ask any questions on DV Lottery, I'd be more than happy to take those questions for you, give you some answers. I've got a couple of things to talk about as well, because we're almost to the end of April, and people need to start thinking about the last 3 months of scheduling. It's kind of critical. I think some people are in a position where they need to really be thinking about the data that's available to us all, and trying to figure out whether you need to move your case or not. And I want to make sure that you're all paying attention to that, and that you're sort of doing the right stuff. So let's talk about that. Let's make sure we're in good shape. Okay. So let me just. There's going to be a bunch of. Let me just answer this one. Rabbit trout. I just realized this morning I didn't post the damn video for the car buying thing. I recorded it last weekend. I didn't post it. So I apologize for that. I probably will come out in a couple of days' time, because I'd like to space out the videos a little bit. It gives me a little bit of a little bit better sort of reaction on the search engine, etc., to make sure that one video is seen before I overlay the next video. So yeah, it'll be out probably Monday or perhaps Tuesday. I've got it recorded, 45-minute long video about buying cars. But anyway, it's just my usual thing of talking to the camera, Anyway, so here we go. Let me just ask you. So I'm looking at the questions, the normal sort of questions, but let me go through this process. I think we need to talk about how you can analyze your own case. I had a pretty enjoyable interaction with a young man from Afghanistan this morning, and he asked me, where should he move his case to? Now, as an Afghan, he can move his case because his own local embassy is closed, and there was a special accommodation made for Afghans, so he can pretty much name the embassy that he wants to go to. And he gave me a list of embassies that he could get to, and there's pros and cons for each one of them. But he gave me a list and asked me which ones he should consider. Now, I would normally respond to someone that asks that question in a way that tries to teach that person to fish, rather than giving that person a fish. Hopefully you understand that, the difference in that. So I went through the process with him of trying to look into which embassies he should look at, and it was very good. He, like, number one, he had paid attention to everything that had been said. So Milad, thank you for paying attention. That's very useful that you are paying attention to the process of looking at the data, etc., and making a wise decision. Not everybody does that. Some people just lazily say, well, what should I do, Simon? And it's not for me to decide for you what you should do in your life, because if I encourage you to move from consulate A to consulate B, and consulate B never schedules you, but consulate A schedules other people in your range, you're going to be, upset with me. And I don't feel like that's my place to make that life-changing decision for you. I'd rather show you the data and show you how you look at that data, so that you can make your own decisions. Okay, and I'm hoping you will respect that decision, all of you. So let me show you the data. And let's have a look and see how you do that process. So I'm going to sort of repeat what I did with Milad this morning, who is the gentleman from Afghanistan. Okay, so let me present. Share screen, second screen. We'll present that one, and we'll bring up let's see, we'll bring up this right. Okay, so you're seeing the normal thing. Let's just toggle off here, toggle the menu. Okay, so this is 2025 data. Firstly, we can see that Zarthesius kindly published the data last night. Everybody looks here at the issue. It's really the wrong place to look, in my opinion. Absolutely the wrong place to look, but people want to have a look. So 25 to 16 issued plus 418 in AP. So they've issued or 25 650 or so. You can sort of add those two together. 14,000 people are in ready status. But ready status includes cases that have been scheduled in previous months where the person never showed up. They didn't show up for interview. The case is still marked ready. They are what I call a no-show. Okay, so it's got 14,000 people are in ready status, but it doesn't mean that all 14,000 of those are about to interview. That means some of them will never interview. 2,467 have been refused. That's final refusal. So those people are out. And in 221G, we've got that number building up, 3,150 people in 221G. That number is particularly high, of course, in Asia, which is mainly Iranian, but all sorts of Middle Eastern cases can get 221G, but Iranians at this time of year are sort of the larger part of the 221G number. And then quite a lot of people in Africa, which is interesting. But like I said, I prefer to look in this column here, right? I prefer to look at the scheduled. Although there is some validity to Philip, you're on. So I know we've talked about this before. There is some validity to assessing the issuance number as a percentage of the quota. There is validity, but I've described that before as looking in the rear view mirror when you're driving a car, right? It's like seeing where we've come from. When actually we should be looking ahead, and looking ahead means looking at the scheduled cases. So if we look at Africa for a second on DV24, let's just bring up another chart. I've done this before, I've explained this before, so it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. But if we just look at DV24, in order to yield 22,500 visas, and actually I'm gonna take this time slice back a bit. There's a slightly weird thing that happens at the end of the year where the government take out some cases from SIAC, and so our final numbers are actually not the correct final numbers. They're a bit understated. So anyway, we got to about 22,500. This number is understated, but importantly, this number is is correct, or more correct than if we went to that final month, right? The final extract. So it takes about 31 to 32,000 people being scheduled to yield 22,500 cases, right? In Africa. Where do the other cases go? Well, some are left at ready, meaning no shows typically. Some are refused, some are in 221G, but just ignoring all this sort of noise in the middle, just looking how many people do we need to schedule in order to get 22,500 people issued, right? So it's a reasonable assumption to say that we need a number between 31 and 32,000 in DV 2025 in order to get to our cap, or not cap, but quota of about 23,000 in Africa, right? And so we can do the same thing for other regions as well. If we look at EU, they took about 17,953 plus these 60, so about 18,000 they got in the end, and they did that with about 22,000 people being scheduled, right? So I'm going to take those two numbers, 32,000 and 22,000. They'll come into play in a moment, right? For Asia region, Asia went over this year's quota by quite a bit, over this year's quota, right? The reason they were able to do that was because Africa was under the quota in DV 2024, and Africa therefore donated, if you like, visas to Asia, and Asia enjoyed that that meal. Oceania and South America also enjoyed that the benefit of that, but EU didn't really. It's like there was not enough capacity in the embassies to take advantage of that extra visa availability, because their quota for that year was higher than this number. But Asia was over. So Asia had 12,000 people being scheduled to produce a number which is too high for this year. Okay, which means, in my opinion, that number we're looking to target something between probably 10,500 to 11,000, something in that range, right? Call it 11,000. Okay, so 11,000 would yield as many, it would fill up the quota for Asia. Okay, if we assume those numbers and we now look at the 25 data, we can say, okay, we're at 20,600, and Simon's saying there should be 32,000, so there should be 12,000 more people being scheduled, right? I'll talk about the number of interviews that means in a minute, but 12,000 more, right? Or 11,000 more, let's say. Okay. In Asia, there should be another 4,000 people being scheduled, right? In EU, there should be, remember my target number is 22. So we need to see about 7,000 more being scheduled, right? So then we bring up a spreadsheet and start thinking about those numbers. Where are we? Here. And I've taken the derivative rate, or I've written down here the derivative rate per region for those three big regions. I'm ignoring Oceania and South America for this part of the conversation, because the three big regions are really the whole story in terms of cap and so on. So I think there needs to be 11,000 more in Africa. There needs to be 11,000 more people scheduled at a derivative rate of 1.9. So we bring up a calculator and we say 11,000 divided by 11,000 divided by 1.9 means that we need to see 5,700 interviews being arranged in the next 3 visa bulletins, right? We've got 3 months remaining. Now, if we look at last year, this is the number of cases that they scheduled in each of the years. So we've got to get 5,700 cases, right? They just scheduled in Africa 1,382 cases, which is lower than last year, where it was 1,702. It's a bit disappointing month, right? But if they did exactly the same performance, if we add up those 3 numbers, that would give us 5,300 interviews in the next month. So we need to be seeing something like 1,800 to 1,900 interviews in Africa for each of the 3 months, right, remaining. Which means embassies like Nairobi have got to get into the game, right? We can't get from where we are now, 1,382, to 18 and 1,900 scheduled interviews unless Nairobi gets in the game. So Nairobi, you got to get your ass in the game, and everybody else needs to do what they're doing, but maybe a little bit more in Africa. And I'll show you in a minute. I'll show you some more data, which is really important. But I'll show you what that means, right? But this is the first thing that we wanted to talk about. I'm going to skip over to EU. Asia is a little bit of a different case. So I'm probably going to pee off a few people in Asia, but Asia just had a pretty good month compared to last year, but does need to see a sort of an increase. You see how in each of the regions, the last 3 months are a larger number of scheduled interviews than most months. Let me make this bigger. Actually, this would be easier for you to see, I think, if I make it bigger. Yeah, let's go bigger still. I like bigger. Right. Okay. So hopefully you can see that clearly. All right. So yeah, you can see that the number in Africa, going back to Africa for a moment, 1,400 for scheduled in March, 1,327 scheduled in April. This is last year. 1,777 in May, 1,702 in June. 1800 in July, 1874 in August, and 1653. So 1682 doesn't cut it, and it doesn't cut it because of Nairobi, and to an extent a slightly sort of lower performance in Accra, and there's a few other embassies that are not taking as many as they should, and I'll show you that in a moment. Asia, if Asia got the same performance as last year for the last 3 months, they would have 2,490 scheduled interviews. You can see that just down the bottom there, at a derivative rate of 2.1, right? So you multiply that total, 2,490 times 2.1, it'll be just over 5,000. And 5,000, let's just nip back to our to the data. And we look at, we're on 7,000 now, and I want them to get to 11,000, right? So they only have to increase by 4,000, and if they did the same thing they did last year, that would be plenty. That would be enough, right? So Asia's in good shape, right? I don't think Asia's a real problem. I think they can get there. Africa, I don't think can quite hit their quota, but I think that's going to cause the government to push the number on Africa, to a higher number than it should reasonably go to. So I think we might see some big jumps, particularly in Africa. And I'm just about to talk about Europe, right? Asia's doing fine, and many of you will disagree. I've had several questions this morning from people. How about Asia 20,000? How about Asia 23,000? How about Asia 29,000? And all of those numbers are risky. The one at 29,000 is extremely risky. I just can't see any reason why we would get to 29,000 from our current point in the feasibility. So, those numbers are risky. And I've said that from the very beginning. I think that we should still get to something around about 16,000, 17,000. And that would be enough to reveal that number of interviews. So, my earlier predictions, by the way, are pretty damn accurate, I think, this year. Go have a look at each of the regions. Go have a look at my predictions. They're accurate. Africa is probably going to exceed my number because they're going to try and push it. But anyway, so EU. Let's talk about EU, particularly for my friend in Europe, or my friends in Europe rather, Philip and Roberto and Stoic. Let's talk about those guys. So you can see the pattern for last year. They had pretty low numbers throughout the year, which is why at the moment we are still ahead of last year's issuances. At this point last year, we were almost identical. In fact, if anything, we're slightly ahead, I think, in Europe. And it's because they were doing very few interviews, right? They only did 246 in May of last year. They did 753, which is not bad, but it's not great, in June. We just saw 598, including Tashkent taking 125 cases, which is Uzbekistan, right? So if you take Uzbekistan out and you take Ankara out, the rest of Europe managed something like 400 and something cases, which is pretty much what I expected from that increase of 1,500. There were some backlog cases in there, and as I mentioned, Tashkent took their own number, but the 598 is not enough, right? We need to see more. We need to see a visa bulletin jump that jumps enough to reveal about 800 cases, non-Tashkent, non-Ankara. Okay, and that really means that they've got to push to around about 20,500 at the lowest. 21,000 would be roughly my prediction for the VB for Europe next month. They could maybe go a little bit more. Roberto, who's been doing a lot of analysis on this, has suggested 23,000. I'd like to see that. I think it's a bit too high, to be honest. But it would be nice if they could get there. So I think we're going to see some increase around about 21,000 for Europe in next month. maybe around 25,000, which is Roberto's number in for August interviews, and then a last visa bulletin, which will be a bit of an effort, a bit of a push, because they will want to try and give people doing AOS a chance and try and use the capacity where they can use the capacity and so on. And so I'm hoping that would be 30 plus, right? At least 29.1 plus. We'll see. Roberto sees that number at about 35, and he might be right. 35 would be like they went to 50,000 last year, but almost nobody got interviews above about 32,000, right? So, that's an extreme effort push. What they did last year in Europe was pretty extreme. That would be about the same thing as going to 35,000 this year. That would be an extreme push, considering we've got a max case number of 40 something. So yeah, that's what they could look like. Now, let's look at the activity for last year. If they do the same as last year, so it's 1,900, 1,000 roughly, so maybe 900 in each month, they would get 2,968 if they did exactly the same as last year, right? Let's call it 2,900. Now, bring the trusty calculator back. At the derivative rate of 2.45 times 2,900, that would give us 7,105, and that's what we need. That's about it, right? That's why looking forward and not looking at the rearview mirror is important. We know what they've got to do in order to meet the numbers we want them to meet, right? We need them to schedule 7,000 more people. So they've basically got to do what they did last month, and that's why I know they should be scheduling around about 1,000 cases next month, and we'll say that about 200 of those will go to Uzbekistan, Ankara, and a little bit of backlog. And so they've got to reveal enough cases in the next visa bulletin to get 800 cases from that increase, right? So above where they currently are, 17.5. They've got to increase that by about 3,000 or 3,500 to reveal enough cases, which gives you about 1,600, 1,700 cases. And at a response rate and scheduling rate of about half, that's how you get to the 800. That's how the math works, right? Okay, so now that's predictions. But I also want everybody to pay attention to what's happening at their embassy, because right now you've got 3 remaining months to be scheduled. If you're at an embassy that cannot get to your number range, you need to know that, right? And you need to start making some proactive moves to start moving yourself. This is a very important topic. I know in 6 months' time, I'm going to be speaking to people that didn't fucking listen to what I'm about to say, and it's going to piss me off, right? Because this is your chance, right? This is for many of you. Understanding what I'm about to explain is going to make the difference between you getting a green card and not getting a green card, because you were too lazy to understand and look at the data and take a decision, right? And honestly, that's what it is at this point. If you don't listen to what I'm saying and make a decision, it's just pure laziness. You're expecting God to intervene, and God won't intervene. This is calculable, right? So let's talk about that. Zarthesius has made this incredibly easy. And I appreciate everything he does for the community, because this is amazing, right? Narek produced a spreadsheet some time back that broke numbers of interviews into 1,000 buckets in each of the consulates. And Zarthesius has adopted that and made that data available for everybody on his website. So you come into the DV25 data, you scroll down, you pay attention, and you read. And it says you can download the latest case numbers for each 1K for all consulates from here, right? Now, this guy I was speaking to this morning knew exactly what I was talking about, and I really appreciated that he had done this. And so I spent a few minutes with him to try and help him through him understanding the data that I'm about to show you, right? And he was then able to make his own decision about whether he needed to move or not, right? So let me bring up this spreadsheet and show you the data. I'm going to start off with, let me just show you what I did with Milad this morning. Milad is an Afghan, and he would normally be associated with Islamabad, right? And so what he had to do was understand how many cases Islamabad have taken. They took 20 in January, they took 4 in February, and they took 16 in March, right? No, that's not right. Sorry, February, March, and April, those 3 numbers. So we said that their capacity was around about 20 cases, right? And that's being generous. Now, Islamabad have taken cases, on average, they've taken cases around about, oh, hang on, I've got to enable editing here. Let's go back, yeah. If we look at the average here, the average number of cases is 45 cases for Asia per 1,000, right? And as you can see, they've taken 16 between 6,000 and 7,000. That means that they are slightly backlogged. Their maximum case number is not yet at 6,500. It's just below 6,500 probably, right? And they take about 45 cases per 1,000, right? In other words, there are 45 cases per 1,000 who would be using Islamabad as their embassy. So Milad was asking me this morning, should I move from Islamabad? And he gave me some options. He considered he could travel to Rid, right? Riyadh, I guess it is. Am, which is Amman. And he listed a couple of others, Doha and whatever. And he said, which is best? Well, I appreciated that he at least thought of it from that point of view. He didn't just ask me, tell me where to move, Simon, which is what many of you do. And I frankly get frustrated and pissed off when you do that, because it shows you're not doing anything at all to help yourselves, right? So he actually went through this process. Milad and I went through this process, and he calculated the 45, which is the average number of cases. He did good there. And he looked at that number of cases and said, okay, if they do 3 more months at 20 cases per month, which is the capacity that they've shown so far they could take, then they're not going to get to his number, which was 10,600, right? So even if the visa bulletin went to 30,000 in Asia, which is a silly dream, that's not going to happen. Even if it went to that, he would be out of luck if he stays in Islamabad, because Islamabad doesn't have the capacity at the number of cases they have in order to get to his number, right? They're not going to get from 6,500. Yes, they're about there. 6,500 to 10,000, which is that would require 180 cases. They don't have capacity to schedule 180 cases in 3 months. That would be 60 per month they would have to do, and they're only doing 20 per month. Now, if Islamabad turn around and start taking 100 cases next month, then it's a different conversation. And then he would be safe at Islamabad. But he's got to decide whether he wants to gamble on Islamabad suddenly doing something, that they haven't done before this year. Okay. So I then, worked through with him and said, okay, which are the better ones to look at? Well, he could look at Amman. He was saying he could look at AMM. So I looked at this column, AMM, and Amman are current. They're not backlogged at all. They're taking a reasonable number of cases per 1,000, an average per 1,000 of 11. They are right up to date. They're not backlogged whatsoever. You can see that because they've scheduled cases between 8,000 and 9,000, right? So that's actually a good one. He also mentioned RID, which is this one. Again, not backlogged at all, right? So that's a good one. So I went back to him and said, yeah, RID and Amman are probably 2 good options. RID was difficult for him to travel to because of visas, etc., I should imagine. And Amman is expensive to travel to. He'd rather be at Islamabad, but he recognizes that he's not going to get a chance if he just sits at Islamabad. So I gave him his choices, right? I also then went on to say, if he switches to, let's say, Amman, and he gets scheduled because Oman is scheduling all the cases that they can, right? If he gets scheduled there, let's say he goes current next month, 10,600 is his number. He then gets scheduled in Oman. He can contact Islamabad and ask them to take his case. Because he's been scheduled, KCC have sent his case to Oman, and KCC are no longer involved. Now, if he wants to get transferred back to Islamabad from the Oman embassy, all he has to do is contact Islamabad and say, will you be able to take my case? They'll say yes or no, right? And he then asks Oman to transfer to Islamabad if they say yes. If they say no, he has to go to Oman for his interview, which will cost him more money, but at least he's guaranteed to have that interview, right? If, on the other hand, he just waits for Islamabad, he'll never get his interview. That's basically what's going on, right? So this is an important lesson for everybody else, and we need to sort of think about, we need to think about following that same thought process for everybody. Now, if you download the data, you can very, very easily see which embassies are doing well and which are not doing well. And you can do the same math I just did for any embassy. So let's take a look at EU, because it's frankly a really good example of a really good region. It's working very well right now. So if you look at these columns, we know that the visa bulletin is current to this row. So any embassy that has cases right up to this final row, 17,500, that's a really good sign that they're right up to date. You know instantly they are not backlogged. And that includes, what have we got? AKD, ATA, BKK, BLG, and so on, right? There's also several embassies that have a sporadic number of cases, right? So you can see these cases where they don't have a case in every 1,000 bucket, but they are right up to date, right? Or they're almost right up to date, and that makes total sense. So if we look at BEN, for example, BEN, they've only taken 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cases all year. But if you're at that embassy, what is that embassy? If you're at that embassy, you're going to be fine, right? I don't know what embassy that is. I don't think it's even Europe. It might be Benin. Well, I've got to look now. Now I'm curious. So if you want to know what these translate to, and you don't recognize the company, oh, it's Bern, Switzerland. Interesting one, people. Switzerland's lovely this time of year if you want to travel there. So anyway, that's a good option. So what that means is that Bern are sitting there they've only taken 8 cases all year, and you might say, oh, that's a very quiet embassy, I don't want to go there. But they're right up to date, which means there's no backlog. And if you get your case transferred to Switzerland, you're going to get your interview, okay? So pay attention, people in Ankara, for example. Can you get to Switzerland? It's a beautiful country. So look at some of these embassies that don't have a consistent number. This embassy, for example, has a consistent number of cases every 1,000, but it's right up to date. That's a good embassy. It's a busy embassy, yes, but it's a good embassy because it's right up to date. And you can see DHB, for example, same sort of thing, good embassy, right up to date. And you can see there's a ton of embassies that are, and I'm going to say the last couple of rows. If they're in that last couple of rows, they're not backlogged at all. Right, and they're well worth looking at, and you need to be looking at this so that we can see Warsaw has a lot of cases every single month, an average of 43 cases per 1,000, but they're right up to date. They're not backlogged. Yerevan here, a little bit backlogged, not much, but they've got cases between 15 and 16,000, but they're doing pretty well. Not too worried about Yerevan this year. And I don't think they took cases yet for April. They might get some at the end of this month. It's still possible they get some this month, right? We've got a few more days left. Same thing with Tbilisi. They're a little bit backlogged, but again, they haven't taken any, or they haven't shown any cases as received, at least in this month, right? So we can't allocate them to Tbilisi. They might be in the in transit status, which means they've already got their interviews, and that data here will be updated later. So I wouldn't be too worried if I was at Yerevan or Tbilisi right now. I wouldn't be worried if I'm at Tia. I wouldn't be worried if I'm at Warsaw. I wouldn't be worried if I'm at Vienna, right? These are all good embassies. And in fact, if you look across here, there's very few embassies I would say you've got a problem in Europe. Europe is frankly doing very, very well. All of the embassies are pretty much up to date and not backlogged at all. Of course, with the exception of Ankara, right? Ankara is a pain in the ass. Now, some of you will look at Ankara and say, well, hang on a minute, what's that case, and that case? Those three cases are people that are smart enough to have got scheduled in another embassy and then transferred back to Ankara, which is exactly what I suggested to Milad this morning. Okay, so it does work, and there's nothing wrong with this. It can work. So you have to pay attention, right? Okay. Some embassies like this look a little worrying. I think that might be, but what you'd have to look at is how they behave in other regions to see whether they really are worrying or not. Okay, so that's a look at EU. I want to do the same thing for Africa. Africa's much more complicated to look at, right? As I say, if you look at this data, you can see a bunch of embassies, like, for example, if we just look here, Kinshasa, obviously very backlogged, not doing anything in the later ranges. They've got a number of cases. I mean, this is just a bit of a nightmare scenario, right? The average number of cases is 28.25. They've just got into the range from 10,000 to 11,000. So to catch up, to get to 42,500, they'd have to do 32,000 cases at an average of, what did we say? 28, right? So get the calculator out. They got 28 cases per 1,000, and they've got 32,000 they would have to catch up. They have to schedule 896 cases, and they're clearly not going to do that. You'd have to be dreaming to think that Kinshasa are suddenly going to get even to the number that is current right now. So if you're sitting there at case number 45,000 in Africa and you're at Kinshasa, then you have to wake the F up and understand that you're never going to get scheduled if you wait for Kinshasa, right? That's literally what that means. It's as simple as that. Because there's nowhere in the world they're going to suddenly schedule 900 cases out of the blue. And that would only get them to 42,000, right? So you're at 45,000. So you're at 45,000. You're not current yet. You can contact KCC now. You can move to another country, right? Move to another country and contact KCC. Unlock your case. Don't anyone damn well tell me anything about delaying your case or unlocking, because that would be a moronic thing to say at this point. So you unlock your case, you move to another country, you change your address, and then a few days after that, you contact KCC and say, hey, by the way, I moved to this other country. Can you make sure I'm scheduled at that other country? Right? Now, which country do you move to? Well, you pay attention to what I just showed you and pick one of the embassies that's doing well. Okay, that's right up to date. That's what you do. So if you're in Kinshasa and you're at 45,000 or above or something, you have days, literally days, to make that happen. Do exactly what I just said. And if you don't do that, then it's your fault. It's going to be your own fault that you've messed up your own case. No point blaming Kinshasa at that point, because you knew what was going to happen and you didn't take advantage of the information you had. Okay, now that's Kinshasa. What other cases? Let's talk about the big one. Let's talk about Nairobi. Nairobi. I believe Nairobi is going to come online. I don't know why. I believe that, right? But I've got no evidence to say that that's the case. What would they have to do in order to catch up? So we look at that and say, okay, Nairobi at this point have taken cases up to the 11,000 to 12,000 range, but they have an average of 33 cases per 1,000. Their density will drop a little bit later on, but let's just take it that it's 33 cases per 1,000, right? And to catch up, to get to the 40,000 range, they're going to have to catch up about 32,000, roughly, let's call it 30,000, they're going to have to catch up a lot, right? So, close my calculator, that was dumb. So, some of you smart people have probably sort of already figured this out, but at 33 cases on average per 1,000 times 30,000 blocks, they would need to schedule 990 cases, right? And that's just to catch up to where the number is now. That's not assuming that they're going to get to 60,000 or 70,000 or anything like that. That's just to get to where they are now, right? Now, that sounds like a pretty big mountain to climb. So again, if you're in Nairobi Embassy, if you're rather waiting for Nairobi Embassy and you're not yet current, right? Your number is above 42,500 and you have to take action. You have to take action now. No matter that, I think Nairobi can do amazing things when it wants to. They could do, they could have a sort of 600-700 month. They've done it before. They could have an 800 month. They've done it before. But if I were you, I wouldn't be gambling on that, right? Personal opinion here, I wouldn't be gambling on assuming that's going to happen. I want to see Nairobi get in the game. I want to see them do some amazing things. And I think they're an amazing embassy. And I'm not mad at them, but they have created such a backlog position that they have got to do something extremely surprising at this point in order to get to where they need to be. Okay, so if you're at Nairobi and you're not current yet, you've got to pull the trigger. You've got to move. Okay, and I get it. It's not easy to move. It's not easy to to make that happen. But honestly, if you please listen. Okay, let's talk about some more embassies now. What does a good embassy look like in Africa region? Well, it's any of these, right, that are in this sort of range. If they've already taken cases in that range, then particularly in that box, right, they're not backlogged at all. If they're in this sort of range, they might be backlogged. The exception to that, of course, is countries which are limited by an accept, right? So the accept can make that appear like a backlogged embassy when actually they're really up to date. But have a look at some of these embassies. Good ones. Algeria is performing well. They're considering they've got an accept. They're performing well. Bombay, funnily enough, performing well for Africans. Interesting. Hadn't thought about that one. Cairo is doing pretty well. Again, considering the accept number that they're on, right? They're in pretty good shape. Let's look at Cotonou. Now, Cotonou have scheduled cases up to 35,000. They get cases in every 1,000. They've got a little bit of a backlog, right? Are they going to fix that? I don't know. But at least you know. Dakar, backlogged. That's in trouble, right? DRS, backlogged, in trouble. Dar es Salaam, right? You're in trouble if you're in DRS. Johannesburg, good one, right? Good embassy there. Look at that. They're right up to date. Look at Guz. What's that? Guz. I don't know what Guz is. But they're right up to date. Again, it's one of these quiet embassies that doesn't do a lot, but is right up to date with their numbers. KGL, Kigali, right? They are backlogged. They haven't taken case numbers above 35,000 that we know of yet. I mean, the data hasn't completely settled. We've got a few cases in transit still. So, maybe some of these are already, already wrong, but, you can see what's going on, right? KLL, another one that's backlogged, appears to be backlogged, right? Kuala Lumpur. Is it Liberia? I guess that's Liberia. No, why would that be Liberia? That wouldn't be Liberia. It's based on the embassy name. What's that? Gabon, Libreville. Never hear anything about this, but Gabon. So that might be an embassy you want to consider. Look at that. It's a quiet embassy, and they're right up to date. They don't have a case in every 1,000 bucket, but they're right up to date. That's interesting. Monrovia is another one that's doing great guns, right? They're taking lots of cases. They took a lot of cases this month. So, another good one, right? But you can see the good ones, you can see the bad ones. Lusaka, a little bit backlogged, right? Bit risky. You got to think about that. They took nothing above 31,000 yet, or 30,000 even. So they're backlogged, right? You all have this data. You can see Yaoundé, by the way, Cameroon, is only scheduled up to about 36,000. So in Africa, although they're pretty good in the EU, funnily enough, in Africa they're a bit backlogged. They were slightly backlogged in Europe, but more backlogged in Africa. That would change if they would just take a few cases this month, right? So that could be good. But yeah, you need to look at this data and understand this data. You've got the data. It's an amazing resource you guys have got. They haven't had this in previous years, right? This year there's no excuse to get caught out because you've got this data. And we should be very grateful to Narek and Zarthisius that have piloted this, this understanding. There is a tab. This is how Narek's spreadsheet looked. It was all three regions per embassy, so you can see things side by side. But I do like this view that Zarthisius added to split them out: Africa, Asia, EU. It just makes it so clear to see what's going on, and you can see EU doesn't have a backlog problem at all, right? Just the known scumbag embassies, right? So okay, so that's the data. Please pay attention to this. This is so important. You've really got to pay attention. You've got the data, go use it. Right, let me take some questions, and let me just scan down and make sure no problems. Okay, let me just do something here. This guy is a moron, so he's going to be, how do I delete this guy? Let's see. There we go. Delete comment, put the user in time, ban user and delete their comments. Yes, please, I think we'll be doing that. Okay, so Maurice, goodbye, you're a moron. Okay, let's take some questions then. If, by the way, don't people that say offensive stuff, you're idiots. Don't, because you're an idiot. You can go and be an idiot anywhere else. Go and play in the park and be an idiot there. You don't need to be online with us. We're all intelligent people. We've got no interest in talking to you, so go away. Philip, you were the first on. And for those people that repeat a question, a legitimate question, but you repeat it over and over and over again, spamming the comments, please don't do that. That's really annoying for everybody. Just don't do it, okay? Right, let's answer some questions. I'll go through pretty quickly. EU 19K, does it have any chances? Silly question, frankly. I've already addressed that, but why even ask? Accra, Ghana, safer interview if I may ask. Okay, so now all these questions that are asking questions about this embassy or that number, you know my thoughts, you know how to look at the data, go think about it, right? Let's see if we can find some good questions. Is having a sponsor required or optional? Thank you, Simon. It is essentially, it's required when the embassy asks you for that information, right? Now, at some embassies, it's almost normal for them to ask, or it is normal. Like Sri Lanka, for example, if you're interviewing in Sri Lanka, they send you information about what you have to take to the interview, and they ask for some information up front. And in that upfront package, they ask for an I-134, right? So they're insisting on that in every case. In other embassies, they don't list it as being one of the required documents, but they do sometimes ask. Some embassies ask for it often, the I-134, and some ask for it very rarely. And then there's a few embassies that almost never ask for it, right? Not many, but there are a few. it depends, right? So for the majority of embassies, I would say this: if you can get an I-134 or financial information, then do that. Get that. It's very important to have. If you're asked for it and you can't provide it at the interview, you're going to be put on 221G while you find that information. You've caused yourself a delay. So go with that information to the interview, preferably. If they never ask you for an I-134 and you've got one in your pocket, kind of deal, then fine, you don't have to show it. But at least you had it ready if you were asked. It makes sense to be prepared. Okay. Okay. High loan 221G can stay. I think you mean how long? Been on 221G since January 29th. Eddie, in general, people from the Middle East tend to endure, particularly Iranians, tend to endure 221G that lasts 5 months, can last 5 months or so. Other countries tend to be less than that. 2 months, is not uncommon. Can get up to that point. January 29th, February, March, and April. Yeah, yours is quite long. So it can be that long. There's no limit. Remember, there is no guarantee that you'll ever clear out of 221G. Some cases remain on 221G at the end of the year. And if that's the case, you lose your chance, right? But in general, they try and get them done before then. Thank you. That's all. Thank you. Okay, so that's that. How is the process of bringing your spouse after you're already in the US as a single applicant? Sammy's lifestyle. I wish you'd have got married before. It's much easier to get married and include your spouse in your DV lottery process. But if you later on marry, then you can do that. It just takes a long time. It takes roughly 2 to 4 years to bring a spouse. Okay, you have to get married and then file to say you want to bring the spouse in. There's also a possibility, if your spouse is already in America and you get married to that person, even though that person's abroad, but they're on, let's say, an F1 or a J1 or something like that, and you get married, you can adjust status in this country. But other than that, it's kind of, it takes a long time to reunite. So you're much better off to marry before you go through the DV lottery process. Okay, 54K Africa, is there a big chance? My prediction for Africa was around about 60K. So there is mathematically a chance, and I think that we're likely to see Africa maybe even go current. We might even see that, but we're likely to see Africa being pushed because they have been trying for years to get Africa to meet its quota, and Africa keeps underfilling. And so they're going to be frustrated about that, and they're going to push Africa as much as they can. If Nairobi comes online and starts scheduling, they'll get the sort of numbers they need on a monthly basis. But even with that, it's still going to be quite a push, quite an effort to get to the quota, which is about 23,000, right? So I think in response to that, the government will probably push the visa bulletin higher than it should mathematically go. However, just because you get current, let's say your case number 80,000, it doesn't mean you're going to get an interview, because some of the embassies won't be able to get there for capacity reasons, right? Some embassies will, and some embassies won't. It becomes a bit of a random draw thing, depending on which embassy you're at. Okay. Any chance you could tell us a couple of hours in advance if you come on Sunday or Saturday by post and later delete it? It's past midnight and I keep an alarm and wait for the live to start. Oh my word. Sorry, Shiva. I did start it earlier this morning. But yes, I think it was last weekend. I had stuff going on Saturday and it got later and later. And in the end, I'm like, I can't do Saturday. So I did Sunday. And so, yes, I can imagine if you're waiting up for the live, that must be frustrating. I'm sorry. I'll say this. I don't always know whether I'm going to do Saturday or Sunday for the live session. Next week, by the way, I will be doing a live session. Why? because next week is DV26, right? Results day. So, I will be live next weekend, and I'm going to try and do a longer than average session to just see if we can catch some early winners. Mind you, by the way, prediction here: if you're gonna try and check your case on next Saturday for DV26, my prediction is it's going to be a nightmare to check your case on as soon as the results are available, because the servers are going to be swamped, they're going to be overwhelmed, and the page will be misbehaving, right? It might take you 2, 3, 10 attempts to see not selected or selected letter. So it's going to be frustrating. So, it happens every year. That's why I'm able to predict it so confidently. But anyway, Shiva, I'm sorry you do that. I don't think there's a chance of me being organized enough to say, which day I'm going to do it. It depends on my family situation, etc. Okay. Hola, quiero saber si tengo a chance. Si tengo a chance. This is Spanglish for 56K Algeria. It's going to be a risky for them to get that level. They are Algeria is doing well, but that's a big jump for Algeria, right? Good day, Simon. Is your advice to use the new debit? It is your advice on the use of debit and credit card for new immigrants. Well, I've given advice about this before to Tete. I understand why some people like to use debit cards and cash. And from a financial responsibility point of view, it is quite good to use a debit card or use cash. My daughter's boyfriend is about to start a job, first job sort of thing. And I'm just going through the process of coaching him through financial responsibility. He's never had money before. He's never earned money before. He is like many of you. He's a new person to the world of finance, right? Even though he's an American kid, his family are not particularly wealthy or financially, aware. So he hasn't had anyone to sort of coach him through, and so I'm trying to think how I can explain to him, right? And it's exactly the same advice as I would give all of you. So he's a young kid. He's going to be earning here's his situation. He's going to get a $23 an hour job. He's going to start this week or next week. And so in $23 an hour, that means he'll earn $920 a week before tax. After tax, he's going to earn about $750 a week, right? So tax will take from him about $170 per month, per week. And that's going to be a big shock to him. The next big shock to him is that because he's starting to earn money, he lives with his sister at the moment, and he's going to have to start paying her some rent. And I'm going to tell him that, right? And so rent for a place around here, if you rent a room in a shared house, for example, which is what many young single people will do, they'll rent a room in a house. That will cost someone around about, in my area, about $1,000 to $1,500 per month. Around here, to rent a house, your own little house or an apartment, costs a minimum of $3,000 a month, more likely $4,000 a month, right? House prices and rental prices where I live are quite high. So he's going to be better off if he stays living with his sister and pays her $150 a week, right? That will leave him $600 a week, but he hasn't got a car. And he's got no money. He's never had any money. So I want him to save $400 of that $600 that he's left with every week, $400, towards buying a car. And that will leave him $200, which is his money to spend on whatever, right? And what I'm going to tell him to do is to get a debit card. I don't want him to have a credit card yet. That would be a mistake for him. And maybe for many of you, right? If you're in the same sort of situation. So again, his situation as a young kid starting off in life is similar to some of you, right? So he's got $200 a week to play with. He's never had any money, right? When he goes out at the moment with my daughter, he can't take her out for a meal. He can't take her to the movies. He's got no money, So my daughter pays for much of that stuff, right? And because she's got some money. But he's now going to be earning money, so he's going to start sort of taking her out and taking himself out and going to a fast food restaurant and buying a burger or whatever. And he's going to be working, so he needs to think how he's going to have a lunch, and is he going to buy that from a Subway or a sandwich store? Is he going to make a sandwich and take that to work, and all of that sort of stuff? He's got to think about those sort of mundane things. So he's going to have $200 a week to play with. I'm going to tell him to withdraw $100 a week, and put it in his pocket or his wallet, and spend from that money. And when that money runs out, he's out of money for the week, which means that he's got $100 left in reserve of his spendable money, and he's guaranteed that he's saved $400 and he's paid his sister $150. Right? That's literally how I'm going to tell him to organize his money. Why am I telling him to save so much of his money? Well, he's got no car. He's got to save for a car. At $400 a week, he can get to about $2,000 within a month and a half. He can have $2,000. With $2,000, he can go and buy a car, and then he'll start paying for expenses to run the car and that sort of thing. But with $2,000, he can buy a decent car. Maybe $3,000 for a nice car. This is a young kid. He doesn't need much. Just a used car. What will be a horrendous set of decisions for him is if he doesn't listen to what I say, and he then goes and buys, clothes, skateboards, video games, and all that sort of thing with his money. All of that's a waste of money, right? And so I hope he listens, and he should be able to save for a car. And once he's got $2,000 or $3,000 together and he buys a car, he'll then be paying for car insurance and for gas and everything else every week. And so he'll need to sort of budget for that. But he'll still be able to save $200 or $300 a week out of his pay, which is good, right? For a young kid, that's more money than he's ever had in his life, right? He's from a simple background. So that's a very real thing. So I've had to sort of put on this hat to sort of think through those things to be able to advise this young kid. He's a nice kid. I'd like to see him do well in life, and I'm going to try and start him off with some good advice, which is save, wait to buy a car until you save the money for a car. Don't get a loan to buy a car. Save money first. He'll ride his skateboard around for the first couple of months. Once he's saved up enough money, he can drive around in a car. So you just got to wait a little bit, defer your enjoyment of things a little bit. So debit cards are good for this young man that I'm talking about. He should not have a credit card at the moment. It's too easy to get into debt. If you're a bit older and you got a family, you're a little bit older, you come to the country, then yes, I do recommend credit cards in that situation. I personally use credit cards. But my golden rule for the credit cards is that every penny I spend on the credit is paid off at the end of the month, every month, right? So I use a credit card similar to a debit card. I spend the money, I get the bill, I pay the bill entirely. What I never do is when I get the bill, they let's say you owe $5,000. They'll tell you the minimum payment, which might be, I don't know, maybe it's $125 or something. Some people will look at that minimum payment and pay the minimum payment. And there you go. You're in debt now. Now you owed $5,000. You only paid $125 off. There's $4,700 that you still are on the credit card. And now you're going to start spending for the next month. So now that's how you get into debt. So what I do is I spend my $5,000 or whatever I need to spend each month. It's more than that. I spend my money. I get the bill for $5,000, and automatically my bank sends whatever the bill is. Automatically, I don't even look at it. I don't think about it. I just pay off whatever I've spent that month every single month. Which is why when you look at my credit score, and I've shown this before, my credit score shows for every credit card I've had and for my mortgage and everything else, a checkbox, a green check mark against every single month I've had that credit card, meaning I've been on time in the payment for that, because all of my payments are automated, right? I just automatically pay the whole balance off every single month. If you do that, you're going to have a great credit score. You're going to be in control of your credit, and you'll never really be in debt. You're just using that credit card for free use of their money. And you never pay interest with the way I'm doing it. You don't pay any interest if you do it that way. If you pay off the whole bill, you don't pay interest. So so that's what I recommend. So it depends on you and your situation. Debit card if you're very young and inexperienced and very small amount of money. Credit card is good if you're a little bit more experienced, and particularly in a family situation. But you only spend what you can pay off at the end of the month. Okay. Somebody here waiting, Keta, you're waiting for next Saturday to see if you win. Good luck to you. Is it okay if I change in my DS260 and use high school degree, yet in the application form, I used high school no degree? Yes, it's fine. When you fill in the question, when you enter the DV lottery, it says, which is your education level. That doesn't make any difference at all to your application at any point. They never go back to that and say, oh, you say you've got a degree, but you didn't say that when you entered the DV lottery. That never ever happens in any interview. Nobody cares what you said in the DV lottery entry. They also don't really care what you say in the DS260 in terms of the level of education you select. It's a completely pointless question from our point of view. From their point of view, they're collecting demographic information. That's all it is. How are you? Mario says, how are you? Oh, more questions about money. For money market fund, Prof, how much money should be in the bank statement for single guy? Well, okay. Again, your situation, Mario, is probably very similar to my, my daughter's boyfriend. And you should be saving a good portion of your money every month, but your numbers will differ to his number. It depends on how much money you spend, or sorry, how much money you earn, how much money it's going to take you to live. He can stay with his sister and only pay 150 a week, which is nothing. That's like no money at all, right? I mean, you should be paying 250 to 350 a week rent to rent a room, right? So he thinks that's a lot of money. He thinks paying her $150 is a lot of money. He's got no clue. And so, it depends how much you have to spend for the bare minimum things that you have to spend on, right? So first of all, you put a shelter over your head. Next thing you do is you take out money for saving. The money you save should be at least 20% of your income, at least 20%. If you're not saving 20%, there's a problem. And if you don't earn enough money to take that money straight out of your check, then you need to go and get a second job. That's literally what that means, right? If you don't earn enough money to take 20% of your income and put it straight into savings as a minimum, then you are not earning enough money, and you need to go and earn more money. That means working on Saturday or working on Sunday or working in the evenings, driving an Uber, or digging gardens, mowing the lawn, or whatever. I don't care what it is, but you have to earn more money, right? Get another job, get a second job, be a security guard overnight. And if you're a family man and you think what I'm saying is nuts, that saving 20% of your income is too much, again, it's your job as a family man. That's what you got to do. You got to, you'll do 40 hours a week at your main job, and then you should go and do an evening job. I think I told this story. I had dinner with some friends from the Ukraine. They've lived here for 25, 30 years. Lovely family, live in a beautiful house in my area. Older couple, but they raised a family, right? And this guy was, his profession is, he's a very highly regarded architect working on very large projects in industry, right? So he's actually a well-known architect, and he came from Ukraine, where education is very good, and he was an architect, qualified as an architect when he came here. and he did his day job, and then because he was new to the country and trying to save up money and everything else, he was stacking shelves at a supermarket, every evening. So he would come home from work, have dinner, and go to the supermarket and go and do another job. And he had basically 2 jobs all the time. That's what immigrants have to do, right? I mean, was that hard? Was that hard for him? You bet your life that was hard for him. He lost a lot of sleep, I'm sure, but he provided for his family and gave them all a great start in life. And all of he's got 3 kids, I believe. They're all doing well. He's got a lovely home. They travel, and it's they came here, I think, 25, 30 years ago, but they are living the American dream and very comfortably looking forward to a nice retirement. It's what you got to do. Got to work while you can. Okay. My thought on Casablanca. Yeah, Casablanca is going to be an interesting one. I don't know what they're going to do. I'm hoping they pick up. They are backlogged, as you can see from the data, right? Morris, my wife won the lottery. She's adjusting status. The issue at hand is the long form 824 processing times. Please advise. Oh, the long form 824. The 824 is to do with follow to join. So your wife will adjust status and then submit the I-824. What she has to do is she has to get cooperation between the field office and the embassy where you're located, right? And in some cases, I've seen cases where the adjustment of status interview happened on like September 27th, 28th, something like that. And the embassy was lined up and ready to do the interview for the spouse, and they got through follow to join. They managed to do that. So it is possible. You just have to make sure everybody knows what's going on. The I-824 doesn't really take time to process in DV lottery cases. It's up to you to make sure you've got an embassy appointment arranged for yourself, so that the minute your spouse adjusts status, you're able to do the FTJ appointment, right? But nobody will arrange that for you. You have to do it, okay? Hi, boss. Is it difficult to get an interview for EU 27200? I hope there won't be any quota issues, because currently around 10,000 visas have been approved. Not sure if it all depends on luck now. Yeah, it depends on luck, Sync, a little bit. Your number is in a bit of a risky range, right? But it depends where you are, embassy-wise. If you're at a good embassy, if you've taken steps to make sure you're at a good embassy, you're in good shape, right? I think you're going to go current, and so it will depend on which embassy you're at, okay? Fingers crossed for you. I don't think we're going to see visas running out early, by the way. There isn't any region that is going to run out before September, right? There may be a restriction in September, but I doubt it. It's not going to be like that. After your medical and they notice you are pregnant, will the visa be granted? Yes. Bizarre question, this one. It's like, do you think it's illegal to have a baby? It's not illegal. It's fine. If you're pregnant, you're fine. It's totally normal. Mario, we already talked about it. Harry, is it true that when you submit your DS260 early, it's likely that you get your 2NLs faster and you'll get interview as early as possible? No, it doesn't really work like that. It's very, it's in general, you should generally submit your DS260 early if you can. But if you have a high case number and you submit it early, it just means your case is going to be processed for a long time before you're current, and it doesn't give you any advantage above anyone else in your number range. So it does, in other cases, it's more a question of if you've got a low case number and you submit late, you're going to cause yourself delay. Maybe you want to cause that delay. That's a possibility. But that's what gets most people frustrated, when they've got a low case number and they're waiting for their DS260 to be processed, right? And in that case, you'll wish you had submitted your DS260 earlier, okay? Hi Simon, does Hail Mary possible this year for EU? What was it last year? I mean, what number has been published in the July VB last year? So they got to 50k last year in EU, and yes, that was a Hail Mary. Let me show you how that looked in the data. We'll go on to DB24 and we'll have a look at EU. You can look at the picture, but the picture tells a bit of a story, right? So you can see, if you look very, very closely on this, we have to go pretty close in, right? And let's turn, yeah, we've got the toggle, that's good. Right, so you can see just that there are cases all the way up to 50,000. That's because EU went current in the last VB up to 50,000. However, you can see that almost no cases were scheduled, very, very few cases. You see how this is the normal level of cases up here that get scheduled. Almost no cases got scheduled in those higher number ranges, like tiny number of cases. So this is what a Hail Mary looks like. You know, the case number on the visa bulletin is high, but not many embassies are able to schedule up to that level. And so it only advantages people in some embassies and also adjustment of status cases. That's all. So for the majority of people above 32,000, that's 32,000 there. That was, you know, fairly good performance in terms of number of cases scheduled. And then it goes down a little bit, maybe up to about 35, 36, 37. For most people, that was about their lot, right? And above that, almost no cases got scheduled. Oh, I'm not even showing you this. Frustrating. The way they've got the software, it drives me nuts. It's kind of nuts. So here you go. I'm showing you here. I'll show you again. There's 50,000, right? Almost no cases. No cases in any of those ranges. Like how many cases? So issued 0.3%, ready 0.1%, right? So 0.4% of cases, almost nothing got scheduled up to 50,000. That's just in a few embassies that had a little bit of space, and that's, you know, same down here, right down to about 37,000, where we see a little bit of an increase, but still a very low number of cases. Lots of people still in NVC status waiting to be scheduled, but never got scheduled. And up to about 32,000 is about you know where things got to, maybe even 30,000 for regular to have a normal chance of getting scheduled, right? That's a Hail Mary. Could it happen this year? Yeah, it could happen this year. So, do you think Africa will increase by big numbers in the next months like the previous years, Mr. Simon? I suspect that's going to happen, yeah. Mathematically, my predictions that I gave earlier this year, or in October of last year for Oceania, my predictions are mathematical predictions based, you know, based on the number of cases that should be processed and so on. So it shows where the numbers should get to, but it doesn't take account of last-minute Hail Marys, as our friend was just talking about. It doesn't take account of that, right? That's more a sort of a policy or a, you know, it's just a decision that the visa office might make. And so it's harder to guess what the policy decision will be. So I don't think Africa will go current again. It might do. I mean, it's possible that it goes current, right? But it's also possible that maybe we just see a very high number, like 75,000 or something, in the final visa bulletin. We'll have to wait and see. But that will be a Hail Mary, to use the term that that was just used. That will be a Hail Mary, because mathematically we don't need to get to that number to use the quota. According to the data, the density is still pretty high till AS 10,000, so need to know whether AS 13.3 is safe. In which month do you think I'll get my 2.0? Okay, let's look at the screen again. Let's have a look at Asia. I think some of you are confused about this point, right? So here's the number of, this is density, number of cases which are not holes, right? Is density. That's consistent up until about the 12 to 13,000 range. Actually, this is 24. Stupid. And I've probably just been showing 24 there. Hang on, let's look at 25 data, look at the menu, and we'll look at the Asia picture, since we're looking at that. Right. So there's the density. It's highly dense up until 10,500, roughly. The point at which it cuts off is when Nepal is limited in the draw, right? Then there's another density range, which carries on until, let's say, about that point, which is 15,000. That is when Iran is cut out of the density, right? That's where Iran is limited. And then the remaining density is roughly about, what is that? Around about 25%, roughly. So that means the rest of Asia. So you can separate these out into what is the number of cases per thousand for Nepal, what's the number of cases per thousand for Iran, and what is the rest of Asia, right? I've drawn this. If you look at my video posted in January from my predictions, I've drawn this out in 3 little blocks, right? So the rest of Asia is about 25% density all the way through. And that's all the way through from the beginning to the end. So Nepal and Iran are on their own accept numbers. So, you know, it is possible for Asia to go to one number and Nepal and Iran to either stop because they've got no more numbers or stop because of the accept number, right? And so, you know, we could easily see a situation where we get to 13.3. And yes, I think that's pretty safe. Whereas, you know, Nepal will be stopped earlier than that, right? And Iran might be stopped earlier than that. Okay, so yeah, it could easily work out that way. Why the delay with Freetown Embassy? Now, again, I know what's happening because I can see the data. And if you've been paying attention, you can see the data. But I can't tell you why at one embassy or another they're doing anything because they don't tell me anything, right? We can see the data. We can also, by the way, we can look a month or two after the fact. We can see what issuances they have had in each visa category. And what you see at some embassies is a lot of issuances in the IR category and a reduction, therefore, in DV category. IR is immediate relatives. And so immediate relatives of US citizens, parents and children of US citizens. So that is the highest priority. And for some embassies where they've got an IR backlog, they focus on the IR work and they take resources, if you like, from DV, right? In other embassies, they don't seem to have that backlog. It depends on the country. So you can have a look at the official data. And guess who has all that official data? It's all there in Zarthisius's site in the annual issuances by post, right? So if you go look at this, toggle the menu for a second. I go to Zarthisius's site, issuances by post. I type in here Freetown, right? Toggle the menu so I can see that. And you can go and see, well, what's he done there? He's flipped. Why is it flipped upside down? That's weird. It's weird looking. Anyway, you can see the number of cases. So in February, this is all messed up because I got it so zoomed in. It's ridiculously zoomed in. There we go. That's better. And I can toggle the menu and make it a little bit bigger. There you go. There you go. Sorry, Zarthis. He's screaming at me right now. I'm sure if he's watching this video in replay or something, he's screaming at the screen. Toggle the menu. Zoom out. I can just hear it now. Sorry, Zarth. Anyway, so if we look at their performance, look at this. In February 25, Freetown did 41 issuances of DV lottery and 88 immediate relatives. Seems like they were preferring IR, right? In the previous month, they did no diversity and they did 10 IR. The previous month to that, they did 0 diversity and 93 IR. Okay, looks like they're preferring IR. They haven't told me anything, but just looking at the data, that's what that means. You can come and have a look at the same data. And you can see what they've done in previous years, right? Look at this, like in May of 2017, they did 71 diversity, 71 IR. So at that point, they were roughly splitting the work between the two cases, between the two categories, but they didn't have a backlog. What happened then? Some of you don't understand this. And I say the word COVID, and you say, well, there isn't any COVID. Well, yeah, but there was COVID, right? COVID stopped things being processing. There was this big block of time where COVID was going on, where embassies were pretty much closed, right? And what happened was that created a backlog of IR cases, which that you can see in Freetown, for example. They tried to overcome that backlog, but the more people that get sent to America over time, the more of those people, on immigrant visas, right, like green cards, the more of those become citizens. The more of those people from Freetown that become citizens in America then want to bring their parents or their or kids. Let's say they want to go and adopt a child, right? They can adopt a child. That kid is a high priority IR case, right? So the more people that come from a country, over time, the more of them get IR cases, and the IR cases over time, swamp the embassy, right? That's what happened. So there was a backlog that created a backlog created by COVID. That created a problem, but there are just more IR cases happening in Freetown now because there are more people, from there, right? So if we look at Lagos, for example, let's have a look at what Lagos is doing now. We know Lagos is doing basically no work on DV for the last few years. You see almost no DV work, right? Little bit over here, they did a little bit here, but look at the number of visas they give on IR. Every month they're doing over 1,000 cases, mainly IR and then family sponsored, right? Which is also typically American citizens. So they are looking at American citizens. Why has that happened? Well, Nigeria sent a load of people to America over the last 20 years or so, which is why they're no longer allowed to be in DV lottery, because they exceeded that 50,000 number over 5 years. It means there's a big population of Nigerians in America who have become citizens, and now those people are sponsoring their parents and other family members, brothers, uncles, aunts, or whatever. Well, brothers and sisters at least, mainly. But those Nigerians are sponsoring people in America, in Nigeria, and bringing them across. And those people are going to the Lagos embassy, which is why Lagos is doing no DV interviews, even for people from other countries, right? Because they're doing all of their work, and they're doing a huge amount of work, over 1,000 a month, in IR and family-based cases, right? This stuff isn't mysterious. Zarthisius has the most important site on the internet, as far as I'm concerned. If you want to understand what's going on in DV lottery and immigration in general, this has it all, right? You just need to look. Okay. Couple more questions. Let's see. Oh my God. Oh, someone is not paying attention. Okay. Hi, Simon. My chargeability is Ghana, but I sent an email to KCC to change to Freetown Embassy before finally sending another mail to KCC to change to Cotonou. Can the Freetown come up during my interview? Well, okay. Did you get scheduled in Cotonou? Because they are backlogged, right? So, but can the Freetown, I don't know what that question means. Can the Freetown come up during my interview? They might ask why you had said you should be interviewed there, maybe, but it's not a big deal. You can be honest about that, right? Do you suggest immigration to the USA in the current situation under Trump administration from a third world country like Morocco? Because probably in a way to destroy the country. Thanks in advance. Look, even with the moron that we've got in charge at the moment, America is still a better country than most countries in the world, right? Quite simply. And you can get really amazing parts of America that are very, very comfortable to live in, very safe and protected even from Trump's stupidity. For example, in California, we've got a good governor. Our economy, the economy of California is now the fourth largest economy in the world. Behind USA in first place, China and Germany, and then next is California all by itself, which is obviously also a part of USA, right? So the economy in California is amazing, right? We are a more affluent state than many of the world's countries, most of the world's countries, right? With the exception of China and Germany, right? More than UK, now more than Japan, more than France, more than more than Italy, more than Spain, more than Portugal, more than all of those countries, more than every country in Africa, more than every other country apart from China in Asia. Right? That's just California. And California has a good governor who is able to combat some of the bullshit that comes from the Trump administration, right? It's not cheap to live in California. It's not cheap, but it's worth every freaking penny, all right, to live in California. You get paid more anyway because you live in California, and you have protections. And it's a fabulous place. Like geographically, it's amazing, right? So, there are some other good states in America too. Some of them are more impacted by the mindset of Trump. There is absolutely no doubt about it that if you've got any brain cells at all, you can work out that what Trump is doing to America is a bad thing, right? You can work out that Trump is a moron. You can work that out. It's very easy to work that out, right? If you still think Trump is a good president, then you really aren't paying attention. You really are not even able to think for yourself. And I would question how you're going to qualify for the DV lottery. But I know some of you feel that way, right? Because you're I don't know, because whatever, right? But Trump is doing damage to America without a doubt. But he's only president for 4 years, right? Based on current law. And so how much damage can he do permanently to America? I would still say that America, particularly if you choose where to live well, America is still going to be a better country than many of the other countries, right? It's not all about money. It's about safety. It's about opportunity. It's about, what you can do for pastimes and so on. America's a great country for a lot of that, right? So I still think it's worth coming over here. You just have to be a bit careful and a bit realistic, particularly if you are, not white, frankly. There's rampant racism over here at the moment because that's what Trump is creating. So, that's going to happen, right? Okay. My sister won and put someone on the DS60 form for affidavit, but the person said they won't be able to send them an affidavit. Okay. Can they present different affidavit during the interview? Yes, they can. You actually don't list the person on the DS260 who's going to provide the affidavit of support. And the affidavit of support that they provide is the I-134. So although you list an American address, that is not necessarily the same person that provides the I-134 for you. So you can use someone else. Okay. Is the current process of sending original documents to the embassy 1 week prior easier than the earlier one during COVID when they were supposed to courier it through to KCC? Yeah, it is easier, but not all embassies ask for the documents 1 week prior. I think Sri Lanka does. Perhaps there's a few others. But yeah, that's a lot better because at least you've been scheduled for interview, right? So in the previous process, it meant that some people didn't even get scheduled for interview because KCC didn't process the document. So yeah, it's better. Okay. Could AOS process be successfully finished if your number becomes current in the last VB? Yes. So if you become current in July for September interviews, there is time to do AOS. Yes. You have to take advantage, in my opinion, of the early filing policy, which means you can submit your I-485 in July. As soon as the visa bulletin is released, you can submit that. But if you do that, there is time to process AOS. When you look at on the government website, it says timelines for processing adjustment of status are like 10 months or a year or whatever. That has nothing to do with DV lottery. So there is time to process, and many people do that right up until the last month. Okay. Okay. Is Auckland Embassy processing usually slower than the Sydney one? Not really, no. Not really. Hey, Roy. Freetown, frustrating. Yeah, we just talked about Freetown. Tunis, I've got the data. Oh, there we go. Roberto, my latest analysis. You are the best. Hey, Roberto, I want to hear your update. Right now, we are where we are. Maybe you wait a few days, but yeah, I want to hear what you're thinking. You're a smart fella. Okay, so what else? Let me just scan through, see if there's any other questions here that I can answer quickly. What vaccine should we be up to date for medical? I only have the COVID vaccine certificate. I don't have any proof of what vaccines were injected when I was a baby. So generally speaking, when you go to the medical, the doctors will know what injections people in general take. They know what vaccination programs have been in place. So, for example, they will know if you've likely had the measles injection as a kid, because that was prevalent when you were a child. They will know those things, right? And so they will not necessarily administer all of the injections that you need. However, if they are unsure, they can administer that injection again, and they will do if you'd like them to, or you can get it done before the medical. But if you do it before the medical, you'll probably end up getting more vaccinations than you would have done if you do it at the medical. You just have to balance the additional cost, because in some medicals, yes, they will give you the panel physician will give you the vaccination, but it might be costly to do it there. And so you might want to get your records up to date elsewhere before the medical. It's up to you. Okay. Okay. What are we looking like for 65K? It's possible. A little bit risky. Mathematically, it's a little bit risky, but it is possible. Depends on which embassy you interview at. Okay. Let's see. Came to the US with a B2. Right now, B2 is expired while I'm waiting for the E2 application. But I have 4 days ago between E2 application and B2 application, if selected in DV. Get the... Don't stay in America not being on status, right? If you're, be very, very careful. You don't want to try and adjust status if you've been out of status in America, right? So be very careful. I don't know whether you're saying you're out of status or not, but it sounds like it. So if you won the DV next week, you would then, in my opinion, if you've been out of status, in my opinion, you would be better off to leave the country and not adjust status, right? You can stay here if you get your E2, you can stay here, but just go home for the interview, right? Go back to your home country or a different country for the interview, okay? And yes, you're asking, is that a problem in AOS? Yeah, it could be. Okay. Okay. All right. I think we'll call that a day. I'm just sort of scanning down to see if there's some interesting question jumps out at me. This looks like a last question. Do you think most Americans are aware of how difficult it is, even for working class Europeans, it is to get to the US? Many I've spoken to are ignorant of the facts and demographics of the H-1B. In general, Americans are very uneducated on a wide range of topics. I'm sorry, but that's just so true. They are very uneducated. I like the TikTok app, right? I go on TikTok and I just scan through. I throw the ball for the dog every evening, and while I'm throwing the ball for the dog, I'm watching TikTok videos. Random stuff, like stuff about politics and I don't know, funny videos and dog videos. That's what comes up in my feed, right? But occasionally I get into live videos, and stupidly, about 3 or 4 months ago, I went down a rabbit hole of flat Earth discussions, and so for a little while I was a bit obsessed with flat Earth discussions, arguing with morons that think the Earth is flat. That's one thing that keeps coming up in my feed. So I get these lives that are flat Earth, and I have to just scroll past that. But other ones are political discussions, usually between Republicans and Democrats, and often about sort of policies of the day or things going on in the day. And so I sometimes jump into those lives and listen to those, and sometimes even talk in those. And I can tell you that most Americans have no understanding of economics. They have no understanding of politics. They have no understanding of immigration. They don't understand the Constitution, except that they pretend to be all about the Constitution. They don't understand. They're just very uneducated in general. Particularly, I have to say, and it's a political bias to an extent, but it's backed up by data, when I say that in general, Republicans are more stupid than Democrats. That is the case. I mean, demographically speaking, you can prove that. But it's so true when you actually talk to these people. So, I jump into these lives and they ask you, introduce yourself. Where are you from? And then they hear my accent. They assume I'm not an American. So then I have to explain I'm an American and I'm living in California. I mention I'm living in California, and many of these MAGA idiots will go, "Oh, California." They're so jealous of California that they hate California, right? Because they see us as a raving bunch of lunatics that happen to be supporting the rest of the country, but they don't understand the economics of that, so they think that that's a lie. And then they will not. Certainly, they don't understand that the H-1B, for example, is incredibly difficult to get. They assume that everybody who comes over the border is an illegal, as they call them, undocumented immigrants. They think are illegal. They don't understand asylum. They don't understand things like DV lottery. They don't understand the difference between a green card holder and an asylum seeker and an overstayer of a visa or an H-1B. They don't understand. They got no idea. They do say things like, "Oh, all you need to do is go back home and do it legally." When they talk about illegal immigrants, just go back home and do it legally. They think that everybody has a legitimate legal pathway to come to America, which is not the case. And so Americans are dopey, which is a great opportunity for immigrants, right? If you're educated abroad, particularly if you're a European, you speak good English, and you've got a European education, you're going to run circles round Americans in almost every working position. You will go into it. I mean, when I speak in meetings, etc., I sound like the smartest person in the room very often, and they treat me that way because I sound English. They assume that I must be highly educated, and generally speaking, I don't know, maybe they're being polite, but they don't come up with the ideas in the meeting. Let's put it like that. So it is a common perception that someone from Europe, if you're French or German or Italian or whatever, but you speak nice English and you had a good education in Europe, you're going to do very well. If you're from Africa, they don't understand African universities quite as well over here. But again, you'll be seen as a clever African if you come over here and nicely spoken. A lot of it is to do with how you speak, right? Very important to work on your accent and work on your language skills. Very important. If you're going into a white collar job like an office environment, professional environment, is very, very important. You work on your accent and speak as well as you can. But yeah, they don't know. They don't know, Nathan. They don't know. I don't know why. They're just, I forget what the numbers is, but there's the number of Americans that don't even have a passport, that have never left America, is a very high percentage. They just have no clue what the rest of the world is like. So anyway, okay. One quick last question here from Dante. I read somewhere that this year's DV lottery 2026 will have 52 instead of the normal 55. Do you think the numbers will go lower in the coming years of the DV lottery? Okay, let's talk about two things. DV 25 has a quota of 52,000, reduced by about 3,000 because of another program that was introduced that has taken some visas away from DV lottery. That will continue again in DV 2026, although it will be reduced potentially a little bit. So we'll probably have about 52,000 visas again. Your second part of your question is, do you think the numbers will go lower in the coming years of DV lottery? I think you mean about the 52,000, etc. There's a cap to that, so it's not going to go lower than that. So it's always going to be now at about 52,000. That's going to continue for some time. The other way to look at your question is, do you mean the selectee numbers? I do think that they're going to start selecting less people. I hope so. They give themselves a big amount of additional wasted work. When they select 130,000 or 140,000 people, and they really only needed to have selected 100,000 people, they're increasing their workload by 30 or 40% of the number of DS260s that they need to process. It's a very inefficient idea. So if they would select something like 100,000 or 110,000 at most, they would have less DS260s submitted. They would complete that work faster. It would be a lot easier, and a lot less people will be disappointed. So I'm hoping that they'll also select less people in DV26 than they did do this year, 131,060, right? So it should be less than that. Fingers crossed, but we'll see. We'll know in a week's time. So let's just final point. It's been a long session today, so if you've endured all of this, I admire your amazing ability to listen to me waffle. But if you'd like to hear more of me waffling, come back next weekend on Saturday, May 3rd. That's when DV 2026 results will be available. I'm going to try and stay live for as long as I can endure it, and you can endure it, and I can get permission from the wife. So I'll do a live session, probably 2 or 3 hour live session next weekend on Saturday, and see how that goes. Well, as we're waiting for people to check their results and get frustrated about the servers and everything, we can answer some questions as well for DV25 people. Okay, so join me next weekend. That'll be a special event on the Saturday. I have to check with my wife, but I'm sure it'll be okay. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. If I didn't get to your question, go put your question at britsimonsays.com and I'll answer it there. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.